Hey Blue Demons, I'm Kelly Kester. I'm the advisor for SAF-B.
And I'm Tina Roberts. I'm the advisor for CAFB.
We want to welcome you to our digital and virtual SAFB CAF-B funding workshop. As you know, the university has gone to a totally virtual format for the time being, and so we wanted to bring you some fun funding workshops to you on OSI's YouTube page. So before we get started, we have a small quiz for you to take that will count for your attendance in today's workshop. You can find it on OSI's DHub page under Surveys and Forms. It's labeled SAFB CAF-B Funding Training Workshop Quiz. So if you want to pull it up and fill it out as you go along, that would be great. So why don't we jump on in?
I want to say also we have it linked in the bio below too. So if you just want to click that, it'll open up.
Perfect. So let's jump right in. So first of all, what is SAF-B? So as I mentioned, I'm the advisor for SAF-B. SAF-B stands for the Student Activity Fee Board, which is made up of students across the university. It's any student organization that's affiliated with DePaul is considered eligible for SAF-B funding. So SAF-B gets funds from the student activity fee. And our main purpose is to assist student organizations with their various expenses and events.
And CAFB functions almost identically. The big difference is that we focus on cultural and identity-based student groups. So if you belong to CAFB, you also belong to SAFB, and you have access to both of those funds. So definitely take advantage of it and use what you need to. And DHub, so you should know what DHub is by now, but we want to point out that DHub is where we have all of these forms on OSI's page. You can also use DHub to host any upcoming events, any of your meetings, your contact info. Each group has the option to create their own little website too through DHub. So it's a really great resource. Definitely use it if you haven't. And before we continue, we want to make sure that our little face boxes aren't going to impede your vision of the PowerPoint. So Kelly's going to get rid of our faces for the rest of the PowerPoint. Good seeing you.
Yeah.
Cool. So if you're eligible for funding, these are the things that need to be done. First off, the president and treasurer must attend this funding workshop. And please note that this is all for the May hearing. So if you want to apply for funding in the May hearing or discretionary, president and treasurer must complete this and complete the quiz. Your organization must be in good standing with OSI and DePaul. Your event or your expense must be at least 30 days after the budget period application deadline, and we'll go over the deadlines in a little bit. You must be a registered undergraduate student org. If you are a graduate student org, you would reach out to Kelly to learn more about that process because it does look a little different. And then lastly, the president or treasurer must submit the application on DHub by 5 p.m. on the deadline date. You can use funding for many different things, on-campus events, off-campus events, conferences, tournaments, you name it. The cool thing is that this, for May hearing, it looks at all of next year. So if you have any big events coming up next year, definitely consider applying for this so that way you're all set with your funding. So the May hearing, as you can imagine, it will be virtual. We are still trying to figure out the details of what that's going to look like. So more information will come as it gets closer, but especially if you apply, we will be reaching out to you individually and giving you clear directions on how to attend that hearing and how to get your funding. Either way, though, we do ask that you are detailed in your application and your documents. This is so the boards have the right information to review and then also discuss. And lastly, funds are guaranteed. So please know that going in.
Okay, so let's talk about the different budget periods and deadlines. So as Tina mentioned, the May hearings are going to look a little bit different than they usually do. So for SAF-B in general, the hearings are for requests over $1,000, and that will still remain the same for the May hearing. For the May hearing this year, we'll accept the first 35 complete and correct applications. and we'll require you to do some sort of presentation that will be about 10 minutes. But like Tina said, we'll have some more instructions coming up here. So I'll let Tina talk about the CAFB guidelines.
Yeah, so for CAFB, for our hearings, you can request any amount of money, but please know that we can only give you up to $3,000 per hearing. We are going to accept the first 20 complete and correct applications for May, and it is first come, first serve. If your request is under $1,000, you do not need to present. So just know to be very detailed in those applications, because the board will only be reviewing that and making decisions.
And so this is the typical hearing process. Obviously, it's subject to change a little bit. So if you apply and are accepted for the May hearing, we'll give you some further instructions as that date comes closer. Typically, you're given a 10-minute time slot to present. This is your opportunity really to provide some sort of presentation, handout, or document for the board to review and to give them all the information that they'll need so that they can ask you some questions about what you're applying for funding. So typically how that goes is you'd present for about 7 to 8 minutes, and then the board would ask questions for a couple of minutes. We'll see how that process goes as we further develop it. But if you're not sure what would be included in a typical presentation, we have them listed here on the slide. It's basically describing who your organization is and what your mission is, or what the event is meant to do for your organization and the larger DePaul community, and why you're requesting these items. And so as you can see here, the major piece that will be occurring for both SAFB and CAFB in terms of hearings is the May hearing. The April hearing will not be occurring. So May 4th is the application deadline for both SAFB and CAFB hearings. You are more than welcome to submit your materials prior to May 4th at 5 p.m. We actually encourage that. But if you have questions as you're going through the application, please reach out to Tina or I. And then the hearing date would be that following Friday, which is May 8th. And just noting here too that if you're applying for the May hearing, your event or your expense should be starting July 1st of this year or after. So it can go from July 1st of 2020 all the way through the 2021 June. So all the way through next academic school year. So if you're planning ahead, you're more than welcome to apply for the hearing. And then so for SAFB, there's also one other type of funding that you can apply for. It's called the discretionary. And so that will occur in May as well. It's for requests under $1,000. And so it would go through next school year as well. So basically what happens is it's similar to the hearing, but you do not have to attend. So your application for the discretionary, we ask, is very thorough because you won't be in attendance to answer any questions from the board. So just make sure that you are as detailed as possible in your application. And as you can see here, the discretionary will just follow the week after the hearing. So it will be, the application deadline for discretionary is May 11th, which is a Monday at 5 p.m. And the meeting for the board will be May 15th. And so you'd hear sometime after that. And the dates for this are still July 1st through June of the following school year. Okay, so let's talk about some guidelines, how you can make sure that you're within limits and you submit the right documents. So as you can see here, there are a number of funding limits for SAFB that we want to just make sure that you're aware of. So we can fund up to $1,500 for food per event. If you are hosting an on-campus event and your food costs are over $250, you have to use Chartwell's. It's just a university policy. However, if you have an exception, then you have to work that out and get an exemption form with Chartwell's. We also have a funding limit of $2,000 for instructors or coaches per academic school year, and we're able to fund 1/3 of the cost of uniforms or costumes or other different performance apparel for organizations. Additionally, for non-competitive organizations, we can fund up to $3,000 for travel, lodging, registration, and up to 6 members per organization. Competitive organizations, that number rises just a little bit to $8,000 for travel, lodging, and registration. And then please note that if your event is a benefit or fundraiser, meaning that you would be fundraising or charging an admissions fee or some kind of raffle, that we can only fund up to 49% of the total cost of that event. And so I'll let Tina talk about CAFB funding limits.
Yeah, so for CAFB, as I already mentioned, we can only give you up to $3,000 per hearing. For retreats and conferences, the max we can give you per year is $1,500. For benefits or fundraisers, we can give you up to 49% of the total cost, and that does include, like Kelly mentioned, fundraising, admission fees, or raffles. And for uniforms or costume, we can give you up to 33% of that cost. So items we will not fund, here is a list. I've bolded the points that come up most often. So first off is items that have already been paid for. You have to go through this funding process and we have to approve it before you make any purchases. So that's very important. Also, alcohol cannot be present at any SAFB or CAFB funded event. Truthfully, any org event, but especially the ones that we're helping you fund. With formals, so you are allowed to host dances, that's completely fine, but with formals often come high facility rental fees, and we want you to know that that's not something the boards prioritize. We live in an amazing city and it's gorgeous. However, a lot of the places students want to host formals can easily cost thousands of dollars. So the boards often wonder if that's a good use of funding. So please consider doing on-campus events for those types of things, or find a cheaper venue, basically. And then lastly are personal expenses. So the funding activity fee, it does come from all of the students. So we want to make sure that we're using that money responsibly and that it's going back to as many students as possible. So basically we just keep an eye on applications and make sure it doesn't seem like it's going to a personal expense for anybody. So keep that in mind. And how to apply. So, okay, yeah. So first, go to your DHub page and start on your orgs page. On the left-hand side of the page, you will see money. So click money and then click budgeting. Then you'll be able to select your budget period. So you'll select either like CAFB May or SAFB May. So that's where you're actually applying. And then over on the right-hand side of the screen, you should see budget request, and that's how you'll start your application. For the most part, it's pretty self-explanatory. You just fill in all the blanks about your event or your expense. So just read those instructions and follow it. If you want to go to the next slide, Kelly, the one thing we wanted to make sure to show you are filling in your line items. So this is a view of after the application was submitted. So your view is going to look a little different as you're filling out the application, but it's basically the same with the line items. So first, in that first column, you see name, and we have food there. So for food, I put pizza, chips, and drinks for this movie night. We encourage you to group as many of your items that you're purchasing as possible. So for example, I put food instead of like having pizza on one line and then chips on one line and drinks on one line. Just group it if you can. So the total cost of the pizza, chips, and drinks is $100. That's how much my group needs. You will see this column called Finance by Group. Always leave that 0. You never have to put a number in there. And then you should just be able to click next. And that's all you have to do for your line items. Or you can add more line items like decorations, DJ, speaker. This is just where you're putting everything you need to request. And then you'll continue your application. It's a little difficult to show you all with doing this type of presentation. So if you run into any issues, please let Kelly or I know. It's very easy for us to set up like a Zoom appointment with you and share a screen and like walk through it with you. So please feel free to email us.
Okay, so let's talk about what documents you might need. As Tina said, things that are important are, of course, to fill out your line items. And along with the line items, there are some documents that we'll ask that you submit to us so that we can have a full application. So we'll go through a couple of these in depth. And if you have any questions as you go through, like Tina said, please reach out to us. We're here to help and to advise. So for any line item that you include, we'll have you fill out some quotes that we'll talk about, any sort of room reservations for on-campus events, guest speakers, any sort of maps if you're traveling, itineraries to conferences, and then letters of recommendation for any sort of conference that you're attending, things like that. The key here though is that we just ask that you consolidate your documents into one if possible. So you can put everything into a PowerPoint document or a Word document, however works best for you. It's just easier to have everything in one spot. You can, if you have a couple of different documents, that's okay. But if you have more than 4 or 5, Tina and I will ask you to consolidate it. So why don't we talk a little bit more about specifics? So as Tina mentioned, for each line item, we'll ask that you fill out a quote. So for example, like in Tina's example, she had chips and pop and pizza. So for every individual item, we just ask that you include a quote for chips, one for pop, and then one for pizza. So 2 quotes are needed if the single price for the item is over $100. So that would be things like flights or hotels, things like that. So the key here is just make sure the 2 items that you include, that you'd be happy receiving either one, because the board might opt to fund the lower cost item. So quotes are like screenshots of websites, emails, or invoices. We'll see a couple examples on this next slide. So here it's an example of using kind of an online format. You can build your cart and then take a screenshot and include that in your application here. So as you can see, it has your item price, your cart total, tax and tip if that is necessary, and also shipping. So you can see it here too on the next slide. And so then here are a couple of examples of additional documents. So for any on-campus events, if you are using a room on campus, then we'll ask that you have a room reservation. And so this would be for when the university is less virtual. So we can look into that at a later date. But then, so for biographies, if you are having speakers or performers, DJs, we ask that you include a short bio just so that we know their background and their relevance to your organization. If your organization is traveling off campus and you are requesting gas, then we ask that you use Google Maps to show kind of round trip mileage so that we can get an idea of how that's working. Itineraries need to be submitted for any sort of conference, retreat, or trip. Usually if it's through an organization, then they will supply that to you on their website. If it's with your organization that you're creating yourself, then go ahead and create your own itinerary. That is completely fine. And then for the letter of recommendation, we ask that for conferences, competitions, tournaments, different things like that, that your faculty or staff member or advisor writes a letter of recommendation kind of talking about why this event is important for your organization. And it's just one letter of recommendation for the student org. It's not for every individual attending the event. Okay, and then just as a note too, for any speakers that you're going to have on campus, you must have a guest speaker approval letter for any event that's open to all DePaul students. So if your event is only open to your organization, you don't need this letter. But if it is open to all DePaul students, then you just need to submit a guest speaker approval to the approval board, and they meet monthly. So that is available on forms under the OSI's DHub page. So we're at the end of your application. So just look at your funding checklist. That's also available on OSI's DHub page and will be very helpful to make sure that you have everything that you need. Just double check you have all the necessary documents, and did you explain everything in detail? And then also make sure that your email that you have listed on DHub is current, because that's what we will use to reach out to you. So we want to make sure that we're connecting with the right email address. And then submit. So Tina's going to talk about after the application.
Yes. Mine's a little slow here. I don't know if you click next slide or not.
I am adjusting to, how do I know that I was approved?
Okay, great. I think the internet connection is a little weak at the moment, but we'll keep doing our best. So after you go through the application process and the board meets, and let's say we give you funding, now we go through the next process of, your next steps. So first off, you'll receive an email from either Kelly or I explaining how much money the board approved, and we will attach a funding letter to that email. The funding letter has a lot of different information you can need about like payment processing. It has different contracts and things attached. So that's a great resource to come back to afterwards. Payment processing is next. Sorry, folks, the internet connection is a little slow. There we go. So payment processing, there are 4 different ways that you can spend the money that we've approved for you. So the first one is a direct payment with OSI. So this is something where you actually set up a meeting with Franco. He's the OSI coordinator. His email is right there. You can set up an appointment with him and he will make purchases on your behalf for your group. The next thing you could do is a reimbursement. So this means after you go through this process and you're approved for funding, then you can make purchases on your own and submit a payment request for each line item to receive money back. So that has to be completed within 30 days of your purchase. If it's after 30 days, we might not be able to pay you back. So please be diligent about that. You will upload your fully paid receipts to this for payment processing. That way we can pay you back, and we cannot use, or please don't use any cash sharing apps like Venmo or Cash App. It has to actually be a receipt. And if it's not like a physical printed receipt, it's okay if it's like an Amazon receipt or something of that nature. So the third way is for contracts. This is usually comes up with like DJs, speakers, performers, or venues. So basically, in that funding letter, you'll have a contract available. What you'll do is take that contract, you'll email it to your vendor or to your DJ, whoever it is. They will sign it and give it back to you, and then you'll upload that contract to the payment section of payment processing. We don't want any students to ever sign any contracts because that makes you personally liable. We do not want that. DePaul is here to sign it for you, so we're the ones that have to pay. And your contract has to be submitted at least 21 days prior to your event. The fourth and final way is for an invoice or vendor payment. So basically, some vendors, let's say like if you ordered a large amount of cupcakes, for example, they might give you, what's the word? It's kind of like a bill. They'll give you like a bill that says, hey, you want this many cupcakes and it's gonna be this much money. Then you'll just take that invoice and upload it to payment processing and we'll pay it for you. So you'll be done. So those are different 4 ways. Now I'll show you where you can start payment processing. So you basically would have to go back to the budget portal the same way that you applied. So like you go back to your DHub page, you go to money, budgeting, click the proper budget period request, and then find your application. So it'll look like this. So as you can see, the amount that she requested here is $100 and $50. The boards met and they approved $100 and $50. So now, since we're in payment processing, you'll notice these buttons pop up on the right that say request payment. So you have to go to the payment processing process for each line item. So after you click that button, that's when you'll choose like one of the 4 ways. So it can be like a direct payment with OSI, or maybe you want to do reimbursement. That's where you'll indicate those things. Again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You just follow the directions. There is a form, there's a place for you to upload documents. That's where you would upload things like a receipt. But again, if you need any help, please let us know and we can walk through it with you later. So for travel waivers and driver certification, this is, first off, for the travel waiver, that's if your group is leaving the Chicagoland area. If you are leaving, then you have to complete a travel release and waiver form. It can be found on OSI's page on DHub. And if someone from your group is actually driving a car with your members, they have to complete a driver certification. And that must be completed with Bronco. Honestly, if you just Google like driver certification DePaul, you should be able to find it. So for reallocation, so reallocations usually happen for like two different reasons. The first is if you want to change how you use your funds. So we used the example of the movie night earlier. Let's say that the boards only gave me money for food and they didn't give me any money for decorations. But then after I talked to my organization, we realized we actually really want those decorations. So we can move part or all of that $100 down to decorations. And use it that way. So you do have freedom to use the total amount that you were given. The only thing there is you cannot like make up a new line item out of thin air. You have to be able, you have to move them between the line items you originally requested. So for the movie night, I can't just say, oh, and we also want to have a performer. That's just not allowed. So you have to keep it between decorations and food. The other one is if the date of your event changes. The reallocation form, it is found either on OSI's page or it's also included in the funding letter that we give you. And that must be completed 14 days before your event or your expense.
Okay, so let's talk about how you might market your event or get the word out to the DePaul community. So in general, events that are funded by SAFB and CAFB should be inclusive of the DePaul community and reflect our values as a university. We ask that in your advertising, whether that's through flyers or different ads, that you include sponsored by SAFB in the messaging or sponsored by CAFB, whichever one is appropriate. And if the event is free and open to DePaul students, please say that in your advertising as well. We'd like to open everything up to the DePaul community if possible, if it's appropriate. Obviously, if admission is charged, then the event's considered a benefit, and we've already covered that part. But when you download this PowerPoint, which is also available on OSI's page, we have these lovely logos for you here. So you can include these on your flyers or on your ads quite easily. And so you can just copy and paste these out of the PowerPoint, and we'd appreciate if you used them.
Yeah, and then the last thing here is tips and tricks. So OSI does have a lot of different resources that you can rent for free or for a very small price to kind of spice up your events or just add a little fun thing to it. We can also print posters for you for advertising. You can check out different tabling options with us where you set up a table in the student center and advertise things or get people to join a group, whatever it might be. We also have event bases on OSI's DHub page, and that's basically like kind of like a copy and paste event. So let's say you're not very familiar with event planning, but you want to do like a gamer night. We have listed out then everything you would need for that gamer night. It's a really cool resource, so feel free to explore it. And then also with Pepsi requests, each group is allowed to have free drinks through Pepsi. So it's Pepsi products, like I'm not familiar with Pepsi products, so I can't list them out, but it's a lot of different types of drinks that you can have at your events. Fundraising. So a lot of your events, or some of your events, it might be very costly and maybe the board cannot give you full funding. So we highly recommend that you fundraise to make up for that, additional amount that you need. There is a new crowdfunding site called Inspire DePaul. So it's like somewhat similar to a GoFundMe. The cool thing is that you receive all the funds that you raised. So please look into that if you need to fundraise. And then lastly, as we've said a million times throughout the presentation, you can go to OSI's page to find everything that you might need.
Perfect. And as we said at the beginning of the presentation, please take the quiz. In order for your organization to be eligible for funding in the May hearing and discretionary for SAFB as well as CAFB, you must take the quiz at the link below in order to be counted for attendance. So if you have any trouble accessing or you have any questions, I'll advance to this final slide that you can get in touch with Tina and I with the emails below. As Tina mentioned, we're happy to jump on a quick Zoom call if that's easier to help you guide you through some things, but please feel free to reach out. We are here and available for you.
Yay, thank you, Blue Demons.